This week on the Red Sneaker Writers Podcast.
Do not stop when it gets really, really, really hard. Keep going.
Welcome to the Red Sneaker Writers Podcast. News, interviews, and writing tips for people who are serious about having a writing career and want some practical knowledge to help them achieve it. Your host is the nationally best-selling author of more than 50 books, William Bernhardt.
Hello, sneakers. Merry Christmas and ho, 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 and thanks for joining us. This will be our last podcast of 2021. So I am going to do a little year in review, highlighting some of the trends and developments that might be of interest to hardworking red sneaker writers. As always, I'm joined by my superb sound engineer and cohort, Jesse Ulrich. Jesse, staying warm out in Tulsa?
Very warm.
Yeah.
Actually, apparently it's going to be in the 70s on Christmas here, so that's new. So
I suppose that's better than having to deal with a snowstorm when you're driving to visit relatives.
I guess that's true.
But it doesn't really seem like the whole dreaming of a white Christmas thing.
No, it's like dreaming of a spring Christmas. Is that a song?
It should be. My guest today is Susan Johnson, who is the author of an amazing memoir, Some Dreams Are Worth Keeping, a memoir of my bipolar journey. She has also presented a terrific and much viewed TEDx talk titled Having Mental Illness is Not a Death Sentence. We'll be talking to her about her memoir, the process of writing a memoir, and much, much more. But first, the news. Okay, so I called this the news because, we always do the news, but let's face it, it's the end of the year. All of publishing pretty much shut down a couple weeks ago. So news is hard to come by. Instead, as I said, year-end report, summary of everything been talking about this past year and getting ready for the new year when, of course, you'll get to hear my prognostications about what's yet to come. Every year, the Alliance of Self-Published Authors presents its year-end report, which Jesse is showing you now. If you're watching the video version, I'll put links in the show notes for those of you listening to this on the podcast. The focus, of course, is independent authors as opposed to traditionally published authors. But you know what? The findings are relevant to both. And just to be clear, I am not attempting to take anything away from those who prefer traditional publishing. Traditional publishing has been very good to me, but it's important to understand how dramatically the publishing world has changed in the past 10 or 12 years. And this report gives the numbers to basically back up everything I'm about to say. 12 years ago, when the digital revolution began, traditional publishing still ruled the industry, and indies, independents, small publishers, self-publishers, were the exception. That is no longer the case. Today, although traditional publishing is still strong, and in fact showed some increases in overall revenue this past year, indie publishing is stronger, and perhaps most importantly, for the purpose of this podcast, is putting more dollars in the hands of authors by far than traditional publishing. I know this can be deceptive. Sometimes you read articles in the New York Times or really any New York-based publication or reports from the AAP, the Association of American Publishers, whose members are all traditional publishers, and you get a somewhat skewed view of the industry. That's where you get articles you may have seen saying that ebook sales are sagging or ebooks were just a fad and self-publishing is trivial and none of it matters. Look, that is just not the world we live in anymore. This reminds me of kind of the same thing is happening right now in the film or TV world, as I heard someone pointing out not very long ago. There are two shows, Yellowstone and Succession, that are both family dramas, what I think we used to call nighttime soaps. One's in an urban setting, one's in a rural setting, but essentially the same sort of thing. But Succession which is on the prestigious HBO cable/streaming network, gets tons of press, whereas Yellowstone gets very little. But Yellowstone, in fact, has significantly more viewers. Jesse, how do you explain this phenomenon?
I mean, I think it's all about who has the time and resources to market their things more.
Right.
I mean, like HBO has less shows than whatever. I was actually trying to find where Yellowstone just airs on cable, and I could not get a good answer. Like the Paramount Network is the answer I got.
Jesse, if my mom can find this show,
right?
And she does, you can.
Yeah. My parents-in-law can find it, and they have lots of technology problems. But point being is, let's call Yellowstone a cable show and Succession an HBO show. HBO has less shows to market. Right. So they can send their screeners to every TV reviewer in town.
That's true.
Right? Which is something that CBS/Paramount/ whatever their company's name is called now, Viacom. They have other shows. They have hundreds of shows. So I think you mix that and you mix the sort of I would say the cultural bias of the people who live on the coast versus people who live in the middle. Which there's some of that less than I think less than people think, but that's part of it. And then, remember that a lot of people talked about Game of Thrones, even though its numbers weren't huge, people still watched other shows a lot more. So,
well, I think something very similar, and in the publishing world, of course, it's New York, which still seems to exert a huge influence on the publishing world in terms of the press, but less so if you look at the numbers of what people are actually reading. Traditional publishing overall commands more attention in what I think of as traditional or old school media, newspapers, TV morning shows, the things that book tours used to be made up of, but not so much on the internet. But anyway, look at the numbers for yourself. Indie sales are higher. Indie authors are making, or hybrid authors, people who do both, are making more money. And traditional publishers, even some with very major big five publishers, have trouble paying the bills. This is why we're seeing this trend of, this is related to why we're seeing this trend of traditional publishers continuing to consolidate. They're hoping to compete with Amazon and the indie movement by grabbing larger market shares, but they cannot change the fact that the market has fundamentally changed. Let me read a little bit from this report I'm talking about. Direct access to bookstores was the last advantage for trade publishers over indie authors, but in 2021, those already struggling physical bookstores continued to suffer from lockdowns. More book buyers grew increasingly comfortable shopping online and reading digital books. Readers and writers alike have become accustomed to online book launches and events, and we saw also an increase in authors selling directly to readers from their own websites and on blockchains. Jesse, do you still visit bookstores?
I do. We have a couple of independent ones here.
There's some good ones.
We have a couple of independent ones here in Tulsa, and honestly, there's something very delightful about going into a Barnes & Noble still. So it's the only one of its kind left. So
yeah, you want to hold the book in your hand, right?
I do. I like to own the book, even though I read it on my Kindle. I still like to physically own it. So I end up buying 2 copies.
Would it change if, flash forward to pretending you're my age and your house is full of books and there's really no room anymore? You can't bring something in without taking something out, and you don't want to. And I don't even begin to understand NFTs and blockchains and how that even has anything, but apparently it does.
I mean, listen, I would love to buy some sort of NFT of a Neil Stephenson thing that he wrote only for me, but I don't think that's where this is going. But
800 pages.
Listen,
just
I would
for
love
you,
it,
right?
on the history of some random thing from the 1700s. I'd love it. That's my jam. But
you've also got to factor in supply chain issues, which of course particularly hurt paper-made, that is print books, even more of a problem. Again, I'm looking at the report in 2021, Ingram Spark, which of course distributes and often publishes books for traditional bookstores, increased its print pricing by 6% in the US market, which of course also increases prices, which once again sends more people to ebooks. Audiobooks, which are also now in digital form, are booming. Artificial intelligence is playing a larger role in book marketing, and NFTs and blockchains and cross promotions, primarily on the internet, are also growing in importance. If there's any bottom line here, it's that there are many roads to publishing, and the one you choose may depend upon what is most important to you. But we are not living in the world that we were in 2008. And if you're going to succeed in this world, Red Sneaker writers, you need to know what's going on in there. Anyway, so if you're interested in what the future holds, check out that report. Okay, Jesse, please bring on our very special guest, Susan Johnson. Hey, Susan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks.
This is a busy time of year. Look at that big poster you've got of your book cover behind you. I'm
Yeah,
so jealous. I mean, I've got a little, book, but you've got like wallpaper.
that is my signing. My
But
signing. poster.
yeah, I get it. All right,
Yeah.
traditional first question. If you could offer writers and aspiring writers one piece of advice, what would it be?
Do not stop when it gets really, really, really hard. Keep going.
Right. Don't stop ever, I would think, because,
Right.
particularly when you're starting, I think every day is hard, but you persevere, pronounce, whatever. I want to ask you more about that and your writing process, but let's start at the beginning. This is your first book, right? This
This
is
is my first
obviously
book.
a very personal memoir. What inspired you to write this?
The book was written for my eyes only as a healing process, healing journey. I was having kind of PTSD. I live with bipolar disorder.
Right.
And I was having flashbacks from some very, very dark and difficult times in my life. So I ended up deciding to write out my journey to help heal.
I don't. You have to go all Freud on us or anything, but tell people a little bit more about bipolar disorder. What does that mean?
Bipolar disorder, it's a mood disorder. It's a chemical imbalance in the brain which causes euphoric highs, known as manias, and devastating lows to the point of suicide. And it is treated by medication.
You mentioned chemical imbalance. So is that something that can be detected, like through tests, like physical medical tests?
No, not so
really.
much. More behaviors, but it is a genetic illness. So that's how we were able to trace it back in my family. And I was able to get a quicker diagnosis.
You also mentioned PTSD. Where does that come into it?
I don't deal with too much of that. A lot of people do, but it was just for me having memories and dreams and wanting to put that behind me. And when writing this book, that helped me to do so.
Great. Let me mention while I'm thinking about it, I can see that there are some people watching this live. If you have some questions for Susan, and just type them into the chat box and I will definitely pass them along to her. All right. Okay. So you started writing this as sort of a therapeutic device for yourself. Did you write every day, or do you do it in the morning, or get up? And did it start as a journal? How'd you do it?
I didn't know how to go about doing such a thing. So I found a how to write a memoir workshop at the Gold Coast Casino. And I bought a book and I was on fire. I was like, yeah, let's do this. And then all of a sudden it got down to doing the actual writing. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do.
Right.
How am I going to do this? So I took a non-credit class at our local community college and met a mentor by the name of Bob Colley. He was in his 80s at the time, and he gave me a lot of encouragement that I have talent and that I could really pull off a book like this.
That's fantastic. I should explain, because you mentioned a casino a second ago. I know you live in Las Vegas, and they're doing like educational courses in the casinos now, or what's that?
There was a workshop, and it happened to be about a memoir. Somebody came and gave a talk and sold her book. And I met another friend there, and she encouraged me to keep writing. So
and you did. And you had a mentor, which is always a great idea. And you wrote and wrote. And at some point, this became book length, right?
And I did. And I also, as you mentioned a little bit, I used my journals which were very, very helpful because people can kind of crawl in my head throughout my book and understand what it's like to have bipolar disorder. And I also use doctor records from very, very challenging times in my life during college. And I used doctor records about this thick from a psychologist. And that really helped jog my memory.
Meaning your doctor's records, right? Right. Just to be clear. All right. So at some point, this must have metamorphed from something you were doing for yourself to something you were going to publish. How'd that happen?
I think by the time I was finished, and that shocked my husband because I don't think he really thought I was going to follow through with this. Thanks
Surprise.
Really appreciate it. No, he's very supportive. All joking aside, I decided when I was finished that maybe my story could help people and break stigma. And I knew I wanted to do that with my book. So I decided to go public with a very, very private story.
Well, good for you. That's wonderful. What do you see as the takeaway for people who are reading this book? Obviously, it matters to you. What's in it for the reader?
I think the education and just the understanding of what it's like to have bipolar disorder, also following dreams. So it's for anybody, really. You know, despite obstacles one has in their lives, you can follow dreams and have success and meet those dreams.
Well, let's talk about that more. What were the dreams that you were pursuing? And is that in the book?
Absolutely. That's where the title comes from. Some dreams are worth keeping.
Right.
I wanted to be an elementary school teacher at a very young age. And I went to college and it was very, very hard to get my degree. I ended up getting a degree in sociology and was encouraged to basically take a different route due to this. When you have bipolar disorder, stress sets off the illness. So I was encouraged to find another way to work in schools, educating children. So I became a support staff. And I've been working in an elementary school here in Nevada for the past 14 years. I work with special education students.
I'm confused. Was there someone who thought that a degree in sociology was going to be more practical than an education degree?
I think the whole point was that it was a degree, and that was big for me, having bipolar disorder.
Okay.
That was the whole point, that I did get my degree. So many people cannot, that I beat the odds with that. I went through a lot during those times.
So that's where we get the title, Some Dreams Are Worth Keeping, right?
Yes.
Now, I mentioned at the top of the show also that you've got a TEDx talk out there. Having mental illness is not a death sentence, right? A lot of views on that. Talk about that. How'd that happen?
Well, after I wrote the book, I joined Toastmasters International. Are you familiar with that?
I know what Toastmasters is. Yes. My dad was a member.
Yes. It helps with public speaking and leadership. So I had a very big fear of public speaking. And when the book came out, I wanted to promote the book. And that turned into the dream of doing a TEDx. So last year, I got the opportunity to do a TEDx here in Las Vegas. And it was amazing.
Yeah. Was that at a college, or where did that happen?
It was actually in a hotel.
Not another casino, is it?
No, not
Can we hear slot machines in the background? Or?
Right. Ding, ding, ding.
Okay, where do people go if they want to watch the TEDx talk? Let's get
you can go to my
lots
website.
of views. I'm sorry, your website.
My website, or you can just do a search for Susan Johnson after TEDx. But there's several of us, but you're going to find me. Having a mental illness is not a death sentence, or my website will take you directly there.
Just to be clear, what's your web address? What's your URL?
It's www.sjohnsonauthor.com.
Got it. We'll put that in the show notes too. Let's talk a little bit about this writing process. Did you write every day? Did you get up in the morning? And how'd you do it?
Well, my job is very exhausting. I don't know if you've ever worked with children, but it is exhausting. So my main writing times that I was most productive were the summers. Definitely.
How many?
And I would write once every couple of weeks on a Saturday. I do well when I'm writing in the morning. That's when I'm at my best. I don't know about you.
I am a morning person, yes. How many summers did it take to get this book done?
Many summers. I want to say maybe 6.
That's
several. And the entire book was written by hand.
Holy smokes, really?
Yeah.
Longhand?
Yeah.
By choice, or do you not type, or what?
Yeah. I felt most productive and most inspired by pen and paper.
So that's what worked for you. And then somebody went back and typed this, I assume, at some point.
They sure did. I did not do it.
Yeah, that would be a lot of work, especially if you're not used to it. So eventually this came together and you got the manuscript typed and got the publishing process. Now you heard, or I don't know, maybe during the news segment you went out and made a sandwich, but I think you heard what we were saying about indie publishing and small presses and whatnot. I think that's the route you went with this, right?
Actually, I've been down both roads.
So tell us about that. What was your experience like?
It began with a connection through my aunt and uncle through a traditional publisher out of North Carolina.
But still a small press, I'm guessing, yes?
Yes, a very, very small press. And I must say, I'm not going to mention it, of course, but it was a disaster. It was a disaster starting from the get-go.
But why? What went wrong? What was the problem?
Well, I believe that the wrong files were published, like the unedited. So here I am at a book launch party, and I'm getting all this feedback on how bad the editing is. We love the story. It's fantastic. But the editing is like, and I paid an editor before. It wasn't like it was from just me looking over it.
They're talking about not just, editorial matters, but typos, that sort of thing, right? Misspellings, which creep into every manuscript. That's why you have many, many people go over it. Anyway, so then what did you do? You edited it and got back the publishing rights, or what?
I did. I did. Well, I stayed with the company for a couple of years. They fixed them all. I got it to where
eventually
I was happy. Yeah, right. Where I was happier.
Well, that is another advantage of digital publishing that, once upon a time, when I published my first book in 1991, I don't normally tell this story, but I found a typo in the first chapter and I was mortified. I'd found a mistake in the galleys and then corrected it. And in the process of correcting the mistake, they created another one. I was just but 30 years later, I've never had a single person mention it. I may be the only person who noticed, but still, at that time, you basically had to wait till, the paperback came out or some new edition.
Just that feeling, all this hard work you put into all of your passion, your whole everything. And then all of a sudden, with some typos and everyone's critique, it was a nightmare.
Right.
It really was.
But today, of course, here's another advantage of the digital world. Changes can be made at any time and new files can be uploaded for both the ebook and the printed edition. It's, corrections can be made much more quick. Won't fix those paperbacks that you already gave to your friends or parents. Yeah. You just have to sneak in and replace those at night when nobody's paying attention. Okay, so you got the rights back, and I'm getting the impression at that point you did it yourself. Am I right?
I sure did, but I'm not very techy. So again, I had to find more people to help me. Paid some people that knew what they were doing.
So, which is not at all unusual, especially for somebody doing their first book. Where'd you find reliable people?
I have a very good author friend here in town, and he knows a lot of people. So he was the go-to man. His name's Stephen Murray. Very helpful friend.
So these people, I'm guessing, designed a cover because you got a nice cover.
Oh, no, I already had all that.
You kept the cover.
Yes, except the font is changed for the title. It was yellow, and then I got it changed to black.
But somebody else handled uploading it to all the bookstores and
whatnot.
And writing cover copy, or did you do that? I don't know.
Yeah, somebody did it. Yeah.
Like on the back cover and that sort of thing. So how long's the book been out?
The second edition came out in 2018, but the thing with a bipolar disorder book is it's timeless, really.
Right.
That's what I really like, about the genre. And
is there a point when you think you might need to update it, or, here I am 5 years later or something like that?
I want to start, another book is started. So I think I'm probably just going to let it be and go for another book.
You mean you've started another book? Okay, what's the next book going to be about?
I think it's it's about aging parents.
So this is pretty much complete change, but still maybe some nonfiction elements?
Yes. Cool. I think it's going to take me a long, long time to write it as well. I'm not in any hurry, because, when you put the pressure on yourself, it's a disaster.
Right. So this book came out in 2018. You took, I think you told me, 6 years to write it. So this has been a process. Looking back, if you could tell the 10 years ago, Susan, or if you think, I wish I'd known then what I know now, what would it be? What have you learned along the journey?
I've learned so very, very much. I'm really proud of the way that it's changing lives and bringing hope to people.
Fantastic.
And educating people. So I'm really glad, if I were to, go back in time, and I would encourage myself to do it.
Mm-hmm.
To follow through and to realize that things, were really going to work out, and they have worked out the way that they're supposed to.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Susan, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Let me know when you finish that next book and we'll get you back, okay?
Thanks. This has been so much fun.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, sneakers, just a reminder that I too have a new novel out, although it's getting less new every time I say that, isn't it? But Exposed, which is the second book in the Splitsville legal thriller series with Kenzie Rivera, is now on sale. And I should also mention that I have a Kenzie short story in that new Christmas anthology we were all over in the last podcast, the one that's hanging over my shoulder. Christmas Tapestry. What you got? As I'm recording this, you've got about 3 days to get that before Christmas, although you can probably get it after Christmas as well. But anyway, if there's that, aunt or uncle, you just can't figure out what to get for them, I have the perfect suggestion, and it's right there. Remember, all the authors who contributed to this, who were on the podcast last time, are all writing stories involving their series characters from their novels, which makes it kind of a fun sampler of a lot of different people's work. Also, remember, sneakers, if you're writing or you're aspiring to write, please join our Facebook group, Red Sneaker Writers, so you can get daily updates and writing tips and know what's going on out in the writing world. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please rate or review it wherever you get podcasts, or if you're watching it on YouTube, please do it there. It does make it easier for new listeners to find us. All right, then. Until next time, Merry Christmas, every one of you. Keep writing, and remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.